Hi everyone, I'm really happy I can deliver this talk even under the circumstances of coronavirus. So please, be healthy, stay at home, wash your hands and enjoy online events like this. And surprisingly, today we're not going to speak about GraphQL itself or a combination of Vue and GraphQL. Because I believe this topic was nicely covered in the previous years, and if you want to grasp some GraphQL basics, especially with a combination with Vue, you can check the talk of Sarah Vieira, It's GraphQL and Apollo and Vue is Magic, or Guillaume Cho, who is mostly known as Acroom. He is the author of Vue Apollo integration. He gave an amazing talk about GraphQL and Vue as well. Instead, we're going to speak about practical implementation of Apollo client and how to use it in our application and why do we need it. Basically, Apollo client is a combination of fetching data and storing data. So if we speak about, for example, Vue application, it's a replacement for both Axios or Fetch and Vuex as a state management tool. My name is Natalia and I'm a Vue.js core team member. I care mostly about Vue documentation. I'm also a Google developer expert in web technologies, which means I know how to use Google Chrome console. And I work as a senior front-end engineer at GitLab. So, let's start with the first part, like replacing an Axios. How do we fetch data from the GraphQL endpoint with Apollo client? Let's imagine this in a combination with Vuex. First, we're dispatching an action. We trigger an API call. If it's successful, we're committing success mutation. If it's unsuccessful, we're committing an error mutation, and then the state changes. It's more or less the same for any Flux architecture state management. You're creating a boilerplate in order just to fetch and store data from the API. This is fine. It's still good because you can control every single step of this process. But could we do this more easily? In fact, yes. With Apollo client, we are just querying an API, we have a success on error, and then the state changes. And these two things are done for you automatically with Apollo client. Let's take a look on how this is implemented in a real-life application so you're aware on how to use Apollo client. I will use a small app. Let's open it on browser. And this is Rick and Morty based application, and here should be some characters from Rick and Morty. But first, we will need to implement our first query. So let's do this. Here I'm using a Vue 3 syntax, a composition API. Why? First of all, I want to show it to the people as well as Apollo client. And the second reason is we're using composables here. And in terms of Apollo client, they're very similar to React integration because they use hooks. And hook syntax is really close to composables. So I will write the code that is more or less understandable for React developers as well. So the first step is we want to fetch some characters because here we want to iterate through the array of these characters. We already imported favorite characters query here from the GraphQL file. Let's take a look at it. And you can see we're fetching some results, and every single character should have an ID, name, location, and image. And as a first step, we want to fetch some characters to display them on the template. So we are fetching some result. We will name it character result. And we will also want to know about loading state. The great thing about Apollo client is it handles loading state for us, so we don't need to care about having some flag is loading, setting it to true, fetching data, setting it to false. It's all done under the hood. We just need to expose it from the result of our use query composable. And we want to pass characters query just to fetch some data. Let's return some characters, which will be an empty array for now. I will explain it in a minute. And we also need to return a loading state. Let's go to our browser and check how it looks like. So you can see this loading spinner. That means our loading state is exposed correctly. What about characters? Let's console log the char result to see what structure do we have here. Again, going to the page, and you can see this weird ref impl. This means we have a ref object from view 3, and ref is a reactive object that has just one field named value. And what's inside? We have a value, it has characters, characters have results, and results is an array of characters we actually need to display here. So we cannot use char result directly, because we need to expose this array from it. For this purpose, we will need to use another hook from Vue Apollo. It's named useResult, and it serves for actually exposing the result from the deep nested object returned from the GraphQL API. So I want to have characters here, and this characters array should be returned from useResult. I'm passing char result here. I want its initial value to be null, and I want to expose data, characters, results here. Now I can replace this empty characters array with the actual characters, and let's see how it works in browser. Okay, we just fetched some Rick and Morty characters from the API. Let's go back to our slides and continue with local state. So this is cool, we just fetched data, but we can do the same really easily even without Apollo client. And we replaced an Axios, but what about local state management? How do we do this with Apollo client? Obviously, local state can be really complicated and deep. Is Apollo client able to handle it properly? In fact, yes. And local state in Apollo client is an Apollo cache. In fact, everything in Apollo client is stored to Apollo cache. If we go to browser right now and check the console, I have an Apollo DevTools installed. We have a cache here, and everything we fetched from the API is right here in the cache. So we need to operate this cache in terms of having something stored just locally, not fetched from the API. And how does it look? So here is a normal query. It would be the query we're fetching from the GraphQL endpoint. And what is changing if we want this query to operate just locally? We just need to add one small directive. It's add client. And this directive tells Apollo client not to reach out to the GraphQL endpoint, but rather fetch result from the local Apollo cache. And of course, if we want to fetch some data from this cache, first we need to set up the initial state, like we do this with Redux or Vuex. So we need to initialize this favorite characters array in order to fetch data. And how do we change this array later? For this, we will be using GraphQL mutation, like we would do if we wanted to change some data on the GraphQL API endpoint as well. But here we're just sending this mutation to our local Apollo cache, again with a client directive. How does it work? First, we're reading the cache. We're updating some data with this mutation, and then we write back changed data to the cache. Let's take a look. Let's go to our IDE, and first you remember we need to add an empty array for favorite characters right to the cache. So we have this cache in Apollo client. We are passing it to Apollo client constructor. And we want to write some data there. We want to have data where we have favorite characters, and it's an empty array. Let's first check if we have this array in our Apollo cache. Yes, as you can see, it's here and it's empty for now. Now let's go back to our component and make our isInFavorites placeholder work. So first we want to fetch favorite characters from the cache. Again, we will be using useQuery composable here, and we will name it fevResult. We don't need a loading state because our data is stored locally. And if you wonder how does favorite query look like, it's exactly like it was on slides. It just has client directive, and the structure is pretty much the same we have on characters. So here we have a fevResult, and now we can define that our isInFavorites should be fevResult value, because you remember it's still a ref, favorite characters, not query, just favorite characters, find, let's name it fev, if fev id is equal to char id. And this should be Boolean, because we don't want to return an array here. IsInFavorite should be Boolean. No, this is not a placeholder anymore. Great. Let's check how it works. For this, I have a mocked data, so we can set an initial value of favorite characters, not to empty array, but to a certain character. And let's go and check if it works. Yes, you can see this alien rig, and it's bluish, which means it's added to favorite characters array already. If we go to favorites, it's exactly right here. Now we need to work on adding to favorites, because right now the handler is not implemented. So what do we want to do here? In our characters component, we want to send a mutation to change our local cache. And we will use mutation composable, which returns the option mutate, and we want to give it some descriptive name. In this case, it will be add to favorites, and it's use mutation add to favorites. And of course, we need to return this method to use it in the template. Okay, checking it on the browser. Well, nothing happens here. Why? Because yes, we're calling a mutation. We can even check it in our Apollo client. See, I'm using DevTools. I'm definitely an expert. Please connect to Apollo client. Okay, we are here. And if we click on Add on Favorites, you can see we're calling Add to Favorites mutation. But we need to write a handler for this mutation to explain Apollo client what to do when this mutation is called. So we need to write a resolver for this mutation. Resolver's object is passed to Apollo client as well, but for now it's empty. So let's start with the mutation resolver. We want to resolve add to favorites mutation. And here first parameter is parent context, we don't need it. Second is past parameter. And where do we get this character? If we check add to favorites mutation, you remember it was on slides as well, you can see we're passing a character to be added to our favorites array. So here we are taking this character, and we also need an access to the context, particularly to the cache. As a first step, we are reading the cache and storing it to our local variable data. It will be cache read query. We want to read favorite characters query. Then we want to add this character to the favorite characters array. So data favorite characters push character. For now this is going to work, but since version 2.6 Apollo client is encouraging immutable changes of the cache. So be careful when you mutate in favorite characters. It's still gonna work until Apollo client version 3, but after this you need to change your cache immutably. I'm just mutating it for the sake of the speed. I'm just mutating it for the sake of time. And now we need to write data back to our cache. So we're doing cache write query. Again, the same query. And we're passing data. Let's go and check how does it work. Yay, we're adding characters to favorites. Now we need to write handler to remove them as well. So let's go to favorites component and add one more mutation here. So mutate, remove from favorites is use mutation, remove from favorites mutation. And it looks very familiar, it doesn't even return anything. We just need to call it and remove this character from favorites, and that's it. Of course, we need to return this. And we need to write the same handler as we did for add to favorites. I will just copy paste it and change slightly. For this mutation, we are passing just an ID, not the whole character. We are reading the same mutation. We are reading the same query as we did previously. And instead of pushing the character, we just want to filter favorite characters array. So it's data favorite characters filter. Here we have a character, and we want to return only characters that don't have an ID where passed to the mutation. Okay, let's check how it works. Nice, we are removing them from favorites. We can add some and check removal as well. So local state management works pretty fine. Sometimes we have cases where we have old, good legacy REST API and we want to migrate iteratively to GraphQL. How do we combine both of them in the application? Do we need to still use some state management tool like Redux or Vuex and store everything there? In fact, no. Apollo client is able to wrap the REST API. All the magic happens in the resolver, where we had our mutations. Now we are going to write the same for query. And in this case, we're just calling characters, then handling Axios call and returning the characters array. Okay, let's try to implement this in our application. And as a first step, we are changing characters to be client-only query. We don't want our application to fetch them from the GraphQL endpoint anymore. And in the client, we want to write one more resolver, this time for query. So we will have characters query. We don't need to pass anything here. And we want to return an Axios call. You can see that we have an Axios default base URL for Rick and Morty REST API. So we are getting character, and then we have some response. Let's make a console log to see what the structure this response has. And let's make a console log of the stress to see what is returned from the API. Okay, you can see we have some data with the results array, and we have lots of data here, but we want to select only what is defined in our characters query. So we need to map this data and change them slightly. So first of all, we want to return an object. And here is the tricky part, because GraphQL response is strongly typed. We need to add these types to any single object we have in the response, even to the root object. So let's define a type name here. Let's call it characters. And we need also to return a results from this characters query. So we want to have results field, which will be data results. This data is from the REST API. We want to do some mapping. And again, we need to define a type name for every single character. Let's call it character. We want to have an ID, which is char ID, name, obviously char name, image, yeah, boring char image, and location, which is, I guess it's char location, right? Not really, because location is an object and we need to define a type for it as well. Let's say location here, and then we can use our char location spread. Okay, let's go check how does it work. I just forgot to add res here. Yay! Now we have all the data fetched, and if we go to network, you can see these data are fetched not from the GraphQL endpoint, but from the REST one. But also it's available in the Apollo client, and we have completely the same structure we had with the REST API, we had with the GraphQL API here. And if you wonder about our favorites functionality, it still works fine. Cool, but now we described the moment when we had a REST API. What about the moment we don't have any kind of the API? Sometimes we're developing front-end faster than we develop a backend, and we need to mock some responses to work on the UI part, even if we don't have data from the GraphQL endpoint. So yeah, it usually looks like this. But with Apollo client, it's really easy to mock this data and then to migrate to the actual data from the endpoint really easily. Again, all the magic happens in the resolver. We can just return the characters mock, and then when our backend is developing the data for us, we just need to remove this mock and the resolver itself and remove a client directive from our query. Let's try to implement this as well. So let's say we don't have any Axios calls and we just want to return mocked data. And mock here is imported from our mock file. As you can see, our character slightly changed. but all the functionality here is working fine as well. Thank you for listening to this talk. I think that's it. If you want to play with all the implementation I've shown here, there is a small repository named the same as a talk. So please check it and play with it a bit. Thanks.
Так, і ми в ефірі. Щойно ми побачили доповідь від Наталі. В нас є деяка затримка 30 секунд між тим, як ми бачимо ваші питання в чаті, ми зможемо відповісти. Я думаю, Наталя, привіт.
Привіт.
Уже є перші запитання. Людей дуже цікавить, що за шрифти і іконки в тебе є в VS Code.
Іконки в мене досить стандартні, це просто VS Code Icons, а щодо шрифту, це Dunk Mono. На жаль, він платний. Я не буду рекомендувати вам його спіратити, хоча це можна зробити, але він дуже класний в розробці. Це, до речі, одна з причин, чому я перейшла на VS Code заради теми і шрифту.
О, людям подобається твій голос. Пишуть, вау, який приємний голос. А може це
Дякую.
Люди дякують за доповідь. Ми все ще даємо трошки часу для питання. Thanks, cool, thank you. Одні похвали.
Дякую, що слухали. Трошки важко було зробити і онлайн, тому що зазвичай, коли доповідаєш на конференції, маєш контакти з залом, а тут, типу, доповідаєш в порожнечу і жартуєш теж трошки в порожнечу, і це створює свій специфічний ефект.
Люди пишуть, спасибо большое за доклад. Очень было интересно. І ні в кого немає питань.
Як завжди.
Ну, з іншого боку, напевно, ти дуже все гарно розповіла. Дуже все чітко. Як то кажуть, у матросів не вопрос. Ну, раз...
В тебе теж нема.
Ні, я частково слухав доповідь, мені ще треба було обговорювати деякі штуки з організаторами. От. Я особисто сам я не пишу на Vue, тому це було досить менш цікаво.
Можеш провокаційно щось питати про...
Да, у нас є вже запитання. Есть ли возможно типизировать с TS GraphQL? TC.
Так, звичайно. Так, давайте російскую, як питання ставилось. Да, типизировать можно и нужно. Как бы GraphQL предоставляет нам систему типов. И для того, чтобы вывести ее в TS, у него существуют инструменты, достаточно использовать, если у нас есть Apollo клиент, у них есть свой собственный инструмент, который называется Apollo CodeGen. Он на основе вашей GraphQL-схемы сгенерирует вам систему TS-типов, которые вы сможете использовать для того, чтобы, собственно, типизировать респонсы и использовать их в приложении.
Окей, дякую. Наступне питання. I have a question about migration from REST API. How it will work with post put requests. Will it be mutations?
Yeah, I actually had this moment in my talk. In reality, when you want to migrate from REST API to Apollo, you actually have two ways. First way is like you ignore the whole Apollo cache and you just using GraphQL client like you used previously REST client, hopefully Axios, maybe Fetch, and you can just store responses to your state manager like you did previously. In this case, you will be using it like promise-based queries, not smart queries, I've been shown in my talk. But also there is a way when you just wrap in your REST API queries with Apollo client, like it was shown in the top. It takes a bit more time to do this properly because you're migrating the whole REST API calls to the Apollo client, but it's really beneficial when you start changing your REST API endpoints to GraphQL.
So in general, let me wrap up. So post and push requests are mutations in GraphQL. Yes?
Yeah, post, put, and update are mutations.
Okay,
get
thank you.
a query. No problem.
Далі пишу дякую. Все по суті дуже чітко. Наступне питання. Які аналоги для GraphQL замість Apollo?
Є ще Relay від Фейсбуку. Він, на мій погляд, менш зручний у використанні. Він дозволяє вам менше свободи і має менше магії під капотом, ніж Apollo. Але він менш популярний, тому що функціональність насправді трошки менша, ніж Apollo, тому я б рекомендувала Apollo клієнт. Якщо вас не цікавить ця частина з кешем, з цією магією, стейт-менеджментом і тому подібному, є ще більш прості аналоги. Я зараз не згадаю назву, але спробуйте погуглити GraphQL клієнт для Vue. Це буквально заміна Axios на Vuex. Це просто клієнт, який дозволяє вам робити promise-based query на GraphQL endpoint, і після цього ви можете зробити з ним все, що хочете, наприклад, просто зберегти їх у Vuex або в компонент.
Окей. Наступне питання. Як Apollo клієнт показує себе на великих enterprise проєктах? Код виглядає слабозв'язним. Як його підтримувати?
Насправді він себе чудово почуває на великих проєктах. Ми зараз мігруємо наші аплікейшени всередині GitLab. Хто не знає, GitLab – це не single-page application на Vue, це багато маленьких аплікейшенів, які частково об'єднані логікою. От зараз ми, власне, робимо міграцію. Як звичайно, граблі є. Я не буду казати, що це чудово, все там пройде дуже гладенько, все буде класно, ні. Але як тільки ви до нього більш-менш звикаєте, це буде нормально. Що я маю на увазі під звикаєте? Людям, які переходять з архітектури REST плюс будь-який редакт like Flux-like state management, дуже важко усвідомити момент, що ми робимо запит на endpoint в компонентах і зберігаємо результати після цього в кеш. Це типу, боже мій, як так, як без API layer, як ми робимо запити в компонентах, це ж неможливо. Як тільки ви здолаєте ось цей момент, все буде набагато простіше навіть на великому.
Окей, дякую. Наступне питання. Як тестувати?
О, я чекала цього питання. Насправді, якщо ви працюєте з таким мейнстрім-стеком, і під мейнстрім-стеком я маю на увазі React, Apollo, опціонально TypeScript, тестування все чудово. У Apollo є власна бібліотека, яка дозволяє вам тестувати Apollo запити. І все класно. Як тільки ви робите один крок в сторону від мейнстрім-стеку, і я це знаю дуже добре, тому що я працюю з Vue, це стає трошки складніше. Особливо, якщо ви намагаєтесь юзати higher order components, які я не показувала в доповіді, але які існують як один з шляхів. Насправді для Vue ми просто мокаємо весь респонс, датою тестуємо, що правильно показується, плюс окремо тестуємо методи типу Apollo Mutate. Можу порадувати, що якщо ви не працюєте з мейнстрімом, але працюєте з Vue, з версії Vue 3 Vue Apollo 4, яку я якраз показувала, тестувати буде трошки легше, тому що ми тепер матимемо чисті функції вигляду useQuery, useMe.
Окей, дякую. Наступне питання. Можно использовать, получается, весь спектр декораторов, типов, то есть весь функционал TypeScript?
Да, можно использовать весь функционал TypeScript, потому что все абсолютные респонсы, которые вам придут с GraphQL endpoint, вы просто перегоняете через Apollo CodeGen, генерируете себе весь набор интерфейсов и юзаете всю силу TypeScript.
Окей, дякую. Наступне питання англійською. Let's imagine we have some application which is communicating with REST API. On your opinion, what cases are for migration to GraphQL and what profit we can get?
So first case, and we had it at GitLab, when your responses with REST API are really huge, and when you need to make some subsequent queries to get the result. For example, for us, it was like you need to fetch a repository, then you want to know what languages were used in the repository or how many forks does it have. And for this, unfortunately, you need to make subsequent query after you already fetched the repo. And imagine the moment you want to know languages for like 5 repositories. This means an initial query for every single repo, and then a subsequent one for every single repo as well, which gives you like 5 multiplied by 5, 25 queries. With GraphQL, you can just make a call and you will have all the information with one query because you will also fetch only the information you need because our repository returns like 200 fields as a JSON, and that's a lot. So if you have like nested structures, if you need subsequent queries, if you need to work sometimes on a really low connectivity, GraphQL is a way to go.
Дякую. І ще останнє питання, можливо. Если Apollo Cache замена Vuex, есть ли какие-то кейсы, когда все-таки лучше использовать Vuex? Что есть во Vuex, что нет в Apollo Cache?
Я бы сказала, что во Vuex есть геттеры, которые кэшируют, да, это наши compute-свойства. И в случае Apollo клиента, хотя у нас есть возможность написать resolver как замену геттеру, к сожалению, кэшироваться он в этом случае не будет. Поэтому геттер — это один из таких хороших кейсов, где Vuex немножечко лучше. Ну и в целом, опять же, мигрировать очень сложно, если у вас был до этого большой сложный Vuex Store с огромным количеством именно локального стейта. Не того, что вы фетчите из API, а каких-то локальных свойств, то есть какие, допустим, весовик редакторы и тому подобные вещи, большое количество юзер-формочек. Пока что, если вы используете Apollo клиент, как вы видели, наверное, резолверы, они достаточно подробные, детальные и создают ощущение написания большого бойлерплейта. Да, для каждой мутации мы читаем кэш, меняем, записываем кэш. Если локального стейта много, вы можете немножко устать.
Окей, дякуємо за відповіді на запитання.